Hello everyone, good afternoon. Today we will discuss PSIR Paper 2 and we will see the trends and what are the questions that has come this year. And we will talk about shortly, what could be the proper answer for this question. Right, if you see the PSIR Paper 1, it was very much traditional as the last 5 years, 6 years you can compare. There was no difference in pattern of asking question. Now, as far as PSI paper 2 is concerned, this time question was from bit more from contemporary. However, question was also from traditional syllabus. So let me move and see the questions, right? What are the types of questions? What were the questions? And what would be the appropriate answers? Now look at the section A. As you know that every paper has two sections, section A and section B. And section A, the first number question has 5 sub questions. So look at the first question. It asks you discuss the psychological approach to the study of comparative politics. So it's a very new to the for asking questions. If you look at psychological approach, it is a new one. So first you can introduce comparative politics. That comparative politics is one of the subfield of political science, right? Along with political theory and international relations. So when just in just introduction, you just give introduction and just situate the comparative politics. So comparative politics is one of the subfield. The subfield, right, of political science, along with political theory and IR. Now, psychological approach to the study of comparative politics is basically to understand, the comparison of institutions and what institutions are very much important. So, if you look at psychological approach to the study of comparative politics, right? Psychological approach, focuses on comparison of institutions, right, laws, right, concepts, right, and it talks about which government is a better form of government, is a better form of government, right? So that is a psychological approach that focuses on the comparison of institutions, laws, concepts, and it talks about which form of government is better form of government. It is a very much new, it is new approach to understand comparative politics. And it compares different type of government, different types of government and their Impact on people. Impact on people at large. At large. So this is something, you know, a psychological approach to the comparative politics, right? Now let me move to the another question. Neoliberalism lightened neorealism's dark view of international politics. Comment. So it's talk about neoliberalism and neorealism. Now you can introduce that neoliberalism and neorealism both are an approach to understand international politics, right? Yet they have different understanding of international politics. So one can introduce like that. So write introductions, right? Write about neoliberalism and neorealism, and then you begin with realism, right? One line about realism, right? Realism focuses on you know, power, diplomacy, security, balance of power, BOP, right? Military alliance, right? To and so on to understand IR, right? Now liberals challenge the realist perspective. Challenge realist perspective, right? Now neorealism countered liberals. Neorealism countered liberals, and their basic theme was to understand international structure. Understand international structure, right? Kenneth Walls is one of the finest scholar on neorealism. Walls, in his book Theory of IR, you know, analyzed international politics, and he has given focus to security, of course, right? Again, power, right? Again, you know, diplomacy, right? And they argue that international structure is a major cause of conflict in international politics. International structure is a major cause of conflict in international politics, in IP. So he said that look at international structure, and if you look at international structure, it is anarchic. International structure is anarchic. There is anarchy at international relations, right? And due to this structure, there is an international politics is like that state seeks for security, for power maximization. Now look at the counter that was done by neoliberalism, and neoliberalism actually countered neoliberalism countered neorealism, and neoliberals, you know, accepted the idea that international structure is anarchic, yes, but cooperation is possible, right? That international structure is anarchic, yet cooperation is possible. Cooperation is possible. Now, if you look at the earlier thinkers of neorealist, they say that there is anarchy and cooperation is not possible. Cooperation is not possible, and that's why they have used the dark, understanding of neorealist, that since international structure is anarchic and cooperation is not possible, state cannot get benefit, right? There'll be always constant, power struggle at international relations. But neoliberals rejected, that their idea that international structure is, they accepted that international structure is anarchic, yet they rejected that cooperation is not possible. Say that neoliberals argue that the cooperation is possible. How cooperation is possible, right? The cooperation is possible through, complex interdependence. Complex interdependence. Now, if you look at nation state is actually interdependent due to the international trade, exchange of goods and services, right? Flow of capital, right? And globalization, right? So they also talked about international institution. Like, for example, look at UN, look at World Bank, look at IMF, look at EU. So there are several international institutions are emerging around the globe, and there are international law, right? And each country has to follow that law and obey the norms and rules devised by the international institutions. So basically they rejected the dark idea of the neoliberals that cooperation is not possible, right? So that is basically the second answer. Now look at third, explain the non-traditional security threats in context of food and context of environment, right? The the 75 words and 75 words. So one can begin with the contemporary international order, right, which is very much in flux, unstable due to the Russia-Ukraine war, due to the America's withdrawal from WHO, Paris Agreement, right, and its intention to sideline WTO, right? And one can talk about the crisis, like you have food crisis, right? Like for example, Egypt lacked food, wheat, because it because supply of wheat has been stopped from Ukraine because Ukraine was engaged in war. Now, if you look at, so Egypt is one example. Now, another is African countries. African countries also faced a food crisis because of the disruption in the food supply chain in the worldwide. And if you look at, this is a very much non-traditional security threat. Traditional security threat was attack, army, right? Threat from outside. But basically, this is an existential threat, right? This is a very much non-traditional security threat, and several African countries are facing it, right? Some Asian countries are also facing it. Look at Afghanistan, right? There's a constant threat of food, right? Now come to the environmental crisis. Environmental crisis. Now if you look at as US has withdrew from a Paris Climate Agreement 2015, and the world is in disarray. The international economic order and international world order is basically under disarray, and right, uh, countries are not willing to accept the problem that environmental crisis is posing, right? So if you look at the environmental problem, if you look, right, there's a, depletion, uh, right? So there are lots of problem of environmental crisis. For example, look at the, ecological issues, right? Look at the look at the, deforestation station. No, look at, right, uh, the basically weak implementation of UN FCC framework, right? Right. So there have been several conference of parties uh, meeting, like COP 29, right? COP 30, right? Yet world has not put proper attention toward the environmental crisis due to the challenges world is facing today, and that is actually war, right? Like war in Israel and Iran war, right? Then Ukraine Russia war, right? Then competitive nationalism, right? Then US withdrew from Paris Agreement, right? And other country which will follow the suit, right? And that's why if you look at, these are the environmental problem and the food crisis are the two major non-traditional threat to the world. However, there are other threats, like for example fertilizer threat, right? The lack of fertilizer, right? The lack of the willing of the developed country to fulfill its obligations, the international obligations that has they committed in the international environmental agreement, and so on and so forth. So this way you can right answer. Now let me talk about discuss the political socialization of open society and closed society. Now look at, first you talk about political socialization in introduction. What is political socialization? Political socialization is, or political socialization implies the value, belief, attitude, and faith of individual towards their political system, right? Now look at the political socialization of open society. Open society. So one can talk about open society. Open society implies democracy. Open society is a society which respects democracy, rule of law, equality, free and fair election, free and fair election, right? Then freedom of press, right? And so on. Now, if you look at political socialization in open society, right? In open society, right? Basically promotes dissent. It promotes rights of individual. right? It promotes independence of judiciary to protect rights of individual, right? It promotes equality, liberty, and justice, right? Right? They are a free society. They are free society, and in such society, people have faith on rule of law, freedom of press, freedom of speech and expression, right? Freedom of association, right? Uh, Freedom to movement, right to dissent, right against arbitrary action of the state. So that is actually political socialization of the open society. Now, if you can, one can talk about, closed society. Closed society. Now, closed society are society basically, right, which does not respect the democratic values, right? Does not respect democratic values, right? And it talks about, it promotes duty of citizens, then rights, right? Uh, it does not allow freedom of press, allow freedom of press, right? Uh, it focuses on nationalism. It focuses on nationalism, right? For example, if you give example, then right, Nazi's Germany, right? Stalin's USSR, right? Xi Jinping China, right? In such society, focus on, that obey the state, right? And there is a difference in socialization, right? However, open society, you know, uh, promotes the individual rights and limit to the arbitrary action of the state, right? So that is a political socialization between the open society and the closed society. Now, if you look at, right, comment on red lipstick movement, red lipstick movement in the context of feminist rights. Now, one can start with radical feminism. Radical feminism, right, that challenged, right, challenged, the dominance of male and masculine culture in 1950s, 1960s, and in the 1970s, right? Now, they proposed, the radical feminist, conceptualized few idea like personalized political, right? Then patriarchy, then gender, right? Then equality with difference, Now, lipstick movement actually was the part of radical feminist movement, right? Red lipstick movement, right? Red lipstick movement was part of radical feminist movement. Radical feminist movement that argued that feminine quality can be maintained along with equality and rights, right? Feminine quality can be maintained, you know, while claiming for equality and rights. Equality and rights, right? There have been several feminists, right, uh, who argued that feminine can maintain their quality or female can maintain their feminine quality while claiming for rights and equality, right? So they challenge patriarchy, they challenge the masculine conception of understanding of state, right? Like for example, Katharina McKinnon, right? Samuel de Beauvoir, right? So there are many philosopher radical feminists who actually challenged the patriarchy and the masculine conception of understanding of politics and society, right? And they claimed for equality and rights, right? Red lipstick movement was actually one variant among the radical feminist movement, right? So that is actually a red lipstick feminist movement. Now look at the second A. The world currently has been in throes of a twin process of democratic backsliding, right, and democratic backlash, right? How do you explain these paradoxes, right? Now one can start with the definition of democracy and democratization, right? So one can start introduction with democracy and democratization, and can write about it. For example, democracy is one of the value that modern state has cherished, especially the Western world, right, which focused on liberty, individual rights, freedom of press, uh, dissent, then independence of judiciary, consent, multi-party competition. Democracy has traveled around the world. It has spread around the world, but not in one go, right? Democracy has actually spread around the globe, but through gradually. There was a gradual spread of democracy, and even the country who was not democratic became democratic. Like for example, Eastern Europe, right, which was not a democratic country, but it has become democratic, right? Now come to the democratic backslide, right? Now what is democratic backslide, right? Democratic backslide, democratic back, democratic backsliding refers to decline of democracy, decline in democracy worldwide, right? Uh, for example, right, look at US, right, India, then Italy, Venezuela, look at Argentina, Brazil, where there's a rise of the right wing party, right wing party, right. Similarly, there was a competitive nationalism, right. Then there had been you know uh, yeah, a rise of tariff war, right. Then economic decoupling, then MAGA factors, right, MAGA factors, right, like make America great again, right, similar, such events are worldwide, such events are worldwide, right. According to VDAM report, according to VDAM report, right, the democracy in 2024 or 25 are as similar as democracy available in 89 90, right. So if you look at democracy in 2024 and 25 is just as similar as democracy 2000, not 2000, 1990, 1989, 90. Of course, when Eastern Europe was not democratic, right? Right. So it is clearly shows that there is a decline of democracy, that is democratic backsliding. Democratic country has actually, um, uh, there has been several factors that clearly demonstrate that there is a decline of democracy worldwide, right. For example, freedom of press is being controlled, there is no respect for human rights, right. There is no respect for dissent. Then judiciary is actually bypassed. Sometimes executive uses excessive power in several states, like right. Then there is a deep state factor, like in US, Turkey, India, right. There is a deep state factor that determines the policy. Now look at the another, it is asking question, the democratic backlash, right. However, of course, if you look at, there is a democratization, right. There's a a call for to promote democracy and democratic value. If you look at the first world summit on democracy was held in December 2022, right. Now second world summit, now this, if you look at this world summit, it talked about freedom of press, then independence of judiciary, right. It talked about respect for human rights. It talks about the respect for minority rights, respect for minority rights, right. rule of law right. That was a major theme of the um, first summit on world democracy. Now second, look at the second summit of world democracy. it focused on similar thing, including freedom of press, right? Freedom of press, and also respects intellectual property right? Intellectual property rights, right? Also, respect religious rights, and more than 120 countries have participated in such event, right? So if you look at the democratic backsliding and democratic backlash are basically going parallel, right? So one is actually the theorizing and spreading intention. On the other side, if you look at, there is an actual practice of democracy which is going on decline in several countries due to several problems, like make country great again, that is going on in China, India, right, where we talk about Rashtratham, uh, right, or India first call we give, then MAGA factors, then look at the Argentina, look at Brazil, right? So there are such things are going on worldwide. So that is a major content for this question. Now let me talk about withdrawal of US from WHO is said to have far-reaching impact on global health, right? Reimagining the existing WHO is vital for global health agenda. So one can write about WHO that WHO is a specialized agency of UN, like agency of UN, right? Which works on health issues like eradicating minor eradicating health problems like tuberculosis. 1 to 3 example you can give, right? Now you talk about US withdrew after the Trump. If you look at after the Trump, US has withdrew from US has withdrew from WHO. After Trump, US has withdrew from WHO. From WHO. Now US is a major fund giver to the WHO. US is one of the largest donator in WHO. Fund contributing country for WHO. Now WHO work for the if you look at WHO work, it works for uh, you know like Africa, which is facing several world health problems like tuberculosis, even measles. Then if you look at simple fever, then mosquito bite, there are lots of problems, malaria, right? It also works for other continent like Asia, which is the major receiver of the benefit from the WHO. So these two continents, apart from the other continent, that is Latin America, that actually gets lots of benefit from WHO, right? Now, when US has withdrew, it means the US has stopped fund fund to WHO. Now it has going to be far-reaching effect because these countries of Africa, countries of Asia, including India, who is getting major benefit from WHO to eradicate basic health issues like malaria or tuberculosis or measles or other problem, right? Latin American countries are most beneficiary. So of course, the withdrawal of US has far-reaching impact on the world health, right? Right. Now, look at the second part of the question. Right. Reimagining the existing WHO is vital for global health agenda. Again, as we have already talked about the importance of WHO, right? So of course we have to revive WHO, right? Now, why US has withdrew from WHO? One can write about the COVID, right? One can look at the role of the COVID in WHO during the COVID-19, and WHO has played a very vital role, important role for dealing with COVID-19. However, it has certain, uh, contestation with US regarding the China's role in spreading COVID-19, and right, the information that China has blocked and not shared with WHO, right? And WHO has also given relaxation to the Chinese authority, right, for not sharing, right, uh, the information, right? Now reimagine WHO, right? Existing, now as I told you that existing WHO, right, the WHO has a great impact on the world health issue in all continent, especially the continent of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, where the people are, where the countries are poor and they cannot afford the minimum health, right? And in this context, WHO is a vital organizations that supported um, these countries, of course, on the cost of the developed countries who are the major fund giver, right? So, however, WHO, uh, has is in disarray, but the world community should reshape WHO so that it can sustain its significance and contribute at its contributing, right? In this context, the countries of the world, including India, China, right, Russia, Brazil, European countries should come forward and then join it and support it, financially, so that it can, it can remain significant in for the world health issues. Right. Now look at the third question. See, transnational actors have qualitatively transformed the world by the way of their fresh insights and actions. Illustrate your answers with suitable examples. Right. Now one can begin with the definition of transnational actors. Right. Transnational actors like multinational companies, right? I'm writing short. MNCs, multinational companies, PNCs, right? Uh, right? IMF, WTO, World Bank. These all are transnational actors. World Bank, right? ICC, right? Are present around the globe, right? And they have changed the world, right? uh, are present, ICC को छोड़ दीजिए, have contributed, right? Transnational actors like MNC, TNCs, IMF, WTO, and World Bank have contributed for development of the world, right? Right, since 1950s, right? And they were major actors of globalization, globalization, right? Now you can talk about the major transnational actors. Major transnational actors, right? Now first is, of course, uh, World Bank, IMF, and WTO, right? So you can write about IMF and the World Bank and WTO. Then you can talk about MNCs like Amazon, right? Amazon or Google, which has presence around the globe. Then you can talk about the FDI, right? Which has increased around the globe, right? So FDI has traveled from developed countries to developing countries, right? And then you can write the challenges of transnational actors. Challenges of transnational actors, right? Now, if you look at in the recent decade, there have transnational actors are facing lots of problem. Like look at the Amnesty International, or other TNCs, MNC. Look at WTO. Look at WHO. We have talked about. Look at the United Nations, right? Due to the uncertainty in the world order, because of the Russia-Ukraine war, Israel-Iraq war, Israel-Iran war, right? And the conflict that present in the global context. US has already withdrew from WHO. It has withdrew from Paris Climate Agreement, right? And UN is unable to perform its basic duty, that is establishment of peace, right? And this is why, if you look at the transnational actors, which has been established and promoted and patronized by the world community after 1950, and they have become omnipresent after 1990 in a globalized world, are facing severe crisis, right? And the current world structure is basically the fractured world, the broken world, right? The new world order has not born, right? And in this context, if you look at the role and the importance of international transnational actors are actually uncertain, right? So this way you can write about the transnational actors. Now look at the third, of late centrist, center left political parties. Acha, center left political parties means socialist party around the globe. Centrist party means, for example, Congress in India, right? So centrist party means liberal party. You need to understand the question. So centrist means liberal party. Centrist, center left political parties means socialist party, have been facing setback. Of course, it has been facing setback around the globe, whether it is India or whether it is US, or whether look at the US politics, or look at the Brazil, or look at the Italy, where the center right party, that is center right party means right wing party, right wing parties, right? The key points should be clear. So centrist means liberal party, center left political party means socialist parties, and center right parties means right wing parties. So question is, of late centrist and center left political parties have been facing setbacks. So you can write about the story of centrist and center left political parties around the globe are facing challenges because of the unsatisfactory and dissatisfaction among the people of that country. And it is also due to the the rise of the identity politics around the globe, right? And also right of new nationalism around the globe, like America first or India first or China first, right? Now you can write about centrist party and left socialist party, the decline. So why decline of centrist and socialist party? So one can write about the decline of liberal parties and socialist parties around the globe, right? Now one can give example of US, right? Argentina, right? Italy, right? Scandinavian countries, India, right? And others, right? So there is a right? So basically there is a decline of liberal parties, there is a decline of socialist parties, decline of socialist parties around the globe, like India, right? US, then look at France, Germany, then the Scandinavian countries, right? So there is a right now why it is so that because these countries are facing, there are competitive nationalism, like MAGA factors, right? Rise of uh, rise of economic nationalism, rise of identity politics, right? uh, Feeling of Islamophobia, rise of Islamophobia, right? So these are the basically the reason for decline of centrist party and center left parties. On the other hand, there is a rise of the right wing parties, right? Rise of the right wing parties around the globe, right? Now if you look at the country's name, again the same, where the centrist party and the center left party has declined, right? So there is a rise of the right wing parties around the globe, right? And the reason are the same, right? So if you look at that is happening around the globe, right? So there is a so centrist and center left political parties have been facing setback, whereas center right parties have been ascendancy around the globe, right? Around the world, if you look at India, or if you look at you know um, Argentina, Brazil, then Netherlands, Italy, right? However, right, there have been also left party which actually secured power. For example, Britain. For example, Australia. right? Right? But these are the few exceptions. But the the fact is that there has been a rise of right-wing parties around the globe, right? So that is this answer, right? Now let me move to the next. Collective security and responsibility to protect are similar but different in scope, goals, and methods. Explain. So one can begin with collective security, right? For example, yeah, one can, well, collective security is a formula of the UN, right, to prevent the war and establish peace. However, responsibility to protect is a new concept or new evolved concept of the collective security that evolved in 21st century. So collective security as a formula, collective security as a concept. Collective security as a concept evolved after the World War One, right? And it was opted in after World War Two. World War Two in the UN, right? And UNSC had given the responsibility of collective security. Collective security, right? Now one can write about responsibility to protect. To protect. Now R2P has developed in 21st century, and this is a new concept of collective security, right? Collective security. When a country is unable to uh, prevent crime against humanity, genocide, and war crime in their own country, then, right, it is a responsibility of the world to intervene in that country and protect the people, right? Now look at collective security. Collective security is something, that if a country A has attacked country B in the world scenario, right? Look at collective security. Right? It works, so it is, it is a formula that when one country attacks country B, then all country will unite and attack the attacker, aggressor. Right? So this is, a formula that one country should be ready to protect anywhere in the world and any country in the world, right? uh, and it also is based on the formula that power is antidote to the power. So one for all and all for one, right? That is the one formula. Second formula is, power is antidote to power, right? This is an old concept. Old concept. It has been implemented in Korean War 1950, right? And Iraq Kuwait War, right? Now R2P is a new concept, right? To protect people, from four kinds of violence. Right? Like war crime, genocide, crime against humanity, ethnic cleansing, right? And United Nations has intervened approximately 89 times around the globe right, in order to implement responsibility to protect, right? So the scope of responsibility to protect is different than the collective security. However, R2P is a actually extended idea of collective security, right? So that is a basically R2P. Now look at third, global south sensitive model of globalization would prevent the danger emanating from the over centralized globalization. Discuss. Question is same, but of course it is different. It is asked in different language, right? So it is asking about the globalization of the south, you know, the global south basically. Now, if you look at globalization, so one can talk about globalization. In introduction, talk about globalization, right? Define globalization, and then start the the actors of globalization. Actors of globalization which led to the connection of the world, right? So again, here look at IMF, World Bank, and WTO, right? Second is MNCs and TNCs. Third is FDI, right? The fourth is right. The fourth is right the global trade, right? Now you can talk about the globalization after 1950. In post 1945. Now globalization of the 1945 has benefited the developed countries. Developed countries. Look at the dollarization of world trade, right? It has developed, and this is why the developing countries, look at the developing countries, demanded for new international economic order, international economic order, right? To reform the Bretton Woods system, to reform Bretton Woods system. Now look at the 21st century is the century of the global south. 21st century is the story of the story about the rise of the global south. Global south. Now look at, there is a south south, there are south south dialogue, south south dialogue, then rise of BRICS countries, induction of African Union in G20, induction of African Union in G20, right? Rise of China, rise of India and China in the global south, right? So therefore the global south actually talking about the interconnection among the global south country, the third world country, and in order to negate the dominant or very much centralized globalization emanating from the global north, like IMF and World Bank, right? So they have also let down, that is called AIIB, that is called Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Asian Infrastructure, right, Investment Bank, right. Then you had, Asian Development Bank, Then you had, BRICS Bank or new BRICS Bank or New Development Bank, right? In order to sideline the dominant, lender like IMF and World Bank, right? And this uh, third world globalization would benefit more to the countries of the third world than the globalization emanating from the global north, led by the US and European country. So that would be the content of your answer. Now look at fourth A. Latin America has made moderate success in countering US-led global economic unorder by forming various organizations emphasizing regional sovereignty, cooperation, development. Discuss the success and limitation of Latin America countries in resisting US hegemony. So one can begin, the writing about Latin America after 1945, right? So look at Latin American country, Latin America, right, which has huge influence by the US. So Latin American countries, right, countries have been or had been uh, a victim of colonization, colonialism, and imperialism. Imperialism in post 1945, they also faced challenges from the US hegemony or US dominance. Faced challenges from US hegemony in world politics. Right? Now, how do they resist it? Right? They formed, if you look at Latin American countries, they formed LAFTA, that is Latin American Free Trade Agreement among the Latin American countries, right, which benefits Latin American countries each other, right, and it keeps Northern America outside, right. Now look at Mercosur. Mercosur is also institutions of Latin American countries, right? And it is, of course, free trade agreement, FTA, right? There are lots of security, economic security cooperation, political cooperation, economic cooperation, Then, if you look at, cultural cooperation among the Latin American countries, and that had challenged the US hegemony. Now, give you example of like Venezuela, right? Venezuela. Then give example of Cuba that have been the socialist country. Right? Look at Brazil, right? Brazil that has given challenge. Look at Chile till 1983. Till 1983, it has challenged the US hegemony. Now, in the 21st century, again, it is challenging hegemony of the US, right? Then you have Argentina, right? Argentina, which has actually challenged, but not always, but in interval they have challenged the US hegemony, right? And through these organizations, Latin American countries actually, help themselves, and they actually challenge the US hegemony at international level. Now look at how successful has ASEAN plus 3 been in addressing regional problems. ASEAN plus 3, ASEAN plus 3 means ASEAN 10 countries, and plus 3 means one is China, another is South Korea, and third is Japan, right? All 10 countries, basically all 13 countries are, if you look at, the emerging economies of the world, right? And ASEAN has a successful story, right? And it has addressed the regional problems like security, right? Like, the lack of resources, then also the free trade agreement. They have, free trade agreement. They have also RCEP, right? Regional cooperation, economic cooperation, right? Partnership, right? So they have, addressed several problems, and ASEAN has actually, several uh, community. That, for example, they have security community, they have economic community, and they have political community. They have also signed on that, free from nuclear zone, free from nuclear, right? Free or nuclear free zone. Yeah. Nuclear free zone, right? They have addressed several problems uh, for their several issues. They address it, right? And example is RCEP, basically, right? Now let me move. Yeah, we won't be able to look at Trump's return to the White House is a jolt to the push European Union to invest in its own defense and economic and technological revival. Look at Trump, right? Trump is basically, neo-nationalist. You can say neo-nationalist, and basically he is focusing on domestic, affairs more, right? His actually purpose is MAGA, make America great again, right? And therefore he is withdrawing from Europe and other part of the world, right? Look at even the rise of tariff can be seen how America, actually focused on its prosperity of the America itself. So it's focused on domestic. Look at, right, the Monroe Doctrine, uh, that was actually focused on domestic matters and avoided international affairs. Now look at return of Trump has actually, focused on domestic affairs, right? MAGA factors, right? And because of the America decline, right? Because of the decline of US, right? And there were, if you look at in Europe, there is a Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine-Russia war, right? Now, if you look at, if you know, European context, Europe was totally dependent on US. He was totally dependent on US. For example, look at NATO. NATO has major NATO is basically an American-led military alliance, right? Although EU helped it, but it is not EU-led; it is a US-led. US is a major fund giver or fund contributor to the NATO, right? And since US will withdrew from the EU, right, and the security of the European Union, of course, the European Union has to invest on its own defense. Look at the defense budget of European country in the last 2 years. That has gone up. For example, Germany, Italy, France, right? Then other countries, their investment on uh, defense has gone up, right? Now let me move to the section B, right? I'll answer in very short. China's growing footprint and tangible shift in power dynamics in Bangladesh has weakened India's leverage in Dhaka. So one can, talk about rise of China. China in the post in Xi Jinping regime, right? Then one can talk about BRI that has helped South Asian country, and it has invested in Bangladesh, right? However, India is an important partner of Bangladesh, right? And India has also invested lots of money, and it has contributed in Bangladesh development like infrastructure, like energy, hydropower energy, right? Then road, schools, then the other infrastructure, right? However, the emergence of China as a big economic power in the world, right? Giving more leverages to China, and China has influenced the India's neighbor Bangladesh, but also India's other neighbor like Sri Lanka, Pakistan is already there is a lots of uh, infrastructure project is going in Pakistan, right? So this rise of China has actually weakened the position of India's uh, in Dhaka. That is true, right? Now, another factor, if you look at anti-India sentiment in Dhaka, has also, a setback to India's foreign policy, right? And so, therefore, if you look at the Chittagong naval base, that is basically China has set up, right? So, this is, of course, the rise of China and its aggressive investment has weakened India's position in its neighbor, right? The BRI diplomacy, or the fund which is China is giving to India's neighboring country has been described as a dead diplomacy by Brahmachelani, right? Now look at, would you agree with the contention that India's inclination to lean on more aggressive hyper realist posture has gained a new momentum in the aftermath of Pulwama terrorist attack? One can write the India's foreign policy during uh, Modi ji, right? Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So Narendra Modi, foreign policy is often described as a realist foreign policy, right? Because he has focused on defensive offense, and aggressive foreign policy. Aggressive foreign policy, right? India did several uh, counter attack when India got attacked by terrorist organization, whether it is a right, whether it is a OD or another attack. So India has actually did surgical strike. India did Balakot strike, right? And India also held, Operation Sindoor after the Pulwama terrorist attack. And India has clearly said that, there will be no talk with terrorism, and India also suspended India's Indus Water Treaty and said that the blood and water shall not flow together, and every uh, terrorist attack shall be considered as an attack on India, right? Right. So if you look at the India's posture on more aggressive hyper-nationalism has gained momentum. However, it has disadvantages also, right? It has disadvantages also, right? If you look at the during Operation Sindoor, right? Most Pakistan has gained sympathy from the world leaders, right? And India was actually recognized as a attacker, right? So there should be more, shrewd and diplomacy handling with Pakistan rather than, putting their faith on power and security measures, right? So one can write. Now let me move to the next question. For India, multipolar world would mean a multipolar Asia. Now one can write about the international order, right? In the post 1945, in the in the post 1945, there have been establishment of several institutions like UN, World Bank, IMF, UNICEF, right, WHO, right, UNESCO, in order to have very much liberal international order, right? And the world was divided into polar, two pole or two bipolar collision. One was headed by US, another was headed by China, right? So it was a Cold War period. In the post 1990, world has become a one polar world, right? On the other hand, there was a rise of China and India in Asia, right? In the post 2000, there have been a rise of the multipolar world. China, there was a rise of China, Japan, Russia, India around the world, right? On the other hand, in Asia, there was a two superpower. One is China and another is India, right? Now for China, there should be unipolar Asia, but multipolar world, right? For a Indian perspective, there should be multipolar Asia or multipolar world. For US, right? There should be multipolar Asia but unipolar world, and this is why US is actually trying to maintain its status quo and hegemony, right? On the other hand, India wants a multipolar Asia for multipolar world, right? However, China likes or tends to uh, reject India's claim, and it actually like unipolar Asia for multipolar world, right? So if you look at that, India wants a multipolar world in Asia, right? For the multipolar world, let me move to the next class. Next. Does the NAM movement have any future in the wake of India's growing difference towards it? Now, NAM, India was a founding member of non-alignment movement, in the 1950 in the wake of Cold War. India throughout the political history of India since 1950, India maintained NAM as a very significant movement, right, to resist the hegemony of the US, right, and India actually talked about NAM 2.0, right, uh, about what should be the India's strategy in a multipolar world, in a world of 21st century, which has changed altogether, right? And India talked about, the relevance of NAM time and again, right? Now look at in the last one decade, India has withdrew from NAM and it has joined Quad, right? It has joined ITU2, right? And it has stayed away from NAM. There are many scholars who argue that India should take the realist position and stay away from NAM. Now, why? Question is why? Now, question is the rise of China is actually threat to India. There is a pole of strings that China is encircling India in Asia, right? And there is a constant threat of India from China, not on border areas like northeastern area, McMahon line, or in Ladakh area, but also in sea. If you look at sea, so there is a rise of China and Chinese vessels in South Indian Ocean Sea, right? Therefore, NAM has become outdated for India, and India actually have joined military alliance like Quad. Quad is a particular military alliance, what China called, the Asian NATO, right? There are many scholars like Raja Rajesh Gopalan, like Sri Raja Mohan, right? Both argued that the NAM has become outdated for India and India should focus on alignment with America and take the realist position in Asia in order to counter China. Now look at India has, India has prioritized neighborhood first policy, Act East policy, extended neighborhood first policy, Sagar vision, right? Act East Asia Act East policy, look West Asia policy, right? Central Asia policy in order to counter China, right? And therefore, if you look at, it seems that NAM has less future in the wake of India's growing indifference towards the non-alignment movement. Now look at historical ties between India and Japan grew into a special strategy and global partnership. Uh, India and Japan shares common values like rule of law, democracy, equality, freedom of press, right? Both are democratic country. India and Japan, have also signed a special and a strategic partnership, a special strategic and global partnership, right? And both are helping each other. India and Japan also shares cultural. Japan is a Buddhist country, and it was the 7th century when Buddhism traveled from India to Japan, right? Now look at India and Japan, the common problem, the rise of China. Rise of China. Look at the East China Sea where the Japan um, island has been claimed by China, like Senkaku, right? Now then Japan has invested in India. It has set up industrial corridor. It has actually established Delhi metro and metro in other cities. It has promised for, or it is working for um, a bullet train, right? It has set up industrial corridor in different part of India. It has invested, in more than 5,000 new ventures in India, right? And Japan is called as India's natural partner, where we don't have any conflict with Japan, and Japan and India have, you know, a potential uh, for a relationship, be it economy, be it culture, be it people to people exchange, be it education, be it you know political cooperations, or also both countries are committed for, you know, open, inclusive, and free Indo-Pacific Ocean, right? Both countries have joined together along with Australia and US in Quad, right? And India and Japan both are exercising naval, uh, both are using naval exercise, doing naval exercise in Malabar, right? And well, along with other countries like Australia, US, right? Singapore, and so on. So India and Japan, right, has a very much intense relationship, and they grew into a special strategic and global partnership. Now look at here, critically analyze different phases of India's foreign policy since independence. How justified do you think it is Jaisankar's classification of the current phase as a phase of energetic diplomacy? So थोड़ा सा आंसर आपको दे ही दिया है कि current phase that, right, as Jaishankar talks about, that is energetic diplomacy. So first you talk about the India's foreign policy, right? 2 3 line, and then you divide IFP. You talk about IFP in intro, right? And then you divide IFP into phases, right? It depends up to you that how you divide India's phases. But if you divide, India's from 1947 to 1966, when Nehru and Lal Bahadur Shastri phase, then you can talk about Indira Gandhi phase, 1966 to 1984, that is Indira Gandhi phase, right? Uh, right. Now, third is, uh, India's foreign policy from 1984 to 2001, one can take, right? And then for 2001 to 2014, one can take, right? And fifth, 2014 to 2025. One can take this Modi's regime as a different analysis, right? And can write the major events during the events. But yes, you focus on this current phase where the, Indian foreign policy has been aggressive, whether it is economic or whether it is a security issues, right? And India has taken very much realist postures in India's foreign policy, right? With this, I'll move through the next. Right. India maintains a strong ties with countries that will assure a free and open Indo-Pacific, guarantee greater connectivity with the rest of the world and like. So first you talk about, Indo-Pacific, right? In intro, you talk about Indo-Pacific region, right? Now, if you look at the around 70 to 80% of world's trade passes through this region, and China is claiming over this region. China has claimed over South China Sea. It has claimed over East China Sea, right? And the world has threat from the very much Sino-centric world, right? Sino-centric world. Now look at India is committed to free and open Indo-Pacific, right? That should be available to everyone equally, right? And that's why India has actually joined Quad. Now India, had joined hands with US, Japan, Australia, right? And for the free, inclusive, and open Indo-Pacific that should be available to all, right? So now, if you then one should again, talk about the importance of this region, right? So one can talk about define the region. So this region is basically just eastward to the Australia from the Indian Ocean, right? Which is important for the connectivity of the West Asia to the Southeast Asia, right? From India to Australia, from India to Southeast Asia, from India to Australia, right? uh, and so on and so forth, right? So the whole 70 to 80% sea trade passes through this road. There has a huge potential of blue economy, right? And the world has used it, right, as a free and open navigation since 1945. Since the rise of the China has claimed over these regions, right, and it tried to bring back the old glory of the China, right? So it has opened BRI, right? It has increased presence in Indian Ocean, right? Which has become a threat, which has become a threat, to the world order, right? And this is why India and Japan, uh, Australia and US had joined hand together. India has also vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific, that guarantee the greater connectivity with the rest of the world. Now look at tariff threats have pushed India. The tariff threats have pushed India and the European Union closer. Evaluate the India-EU partnership. So, India-EU partnership. Uh, so one can write about India-EU partnership first in introduction. Right, we have very long relationship with EU. India has very long lasting relationship with EU, and both shares rule of law, freedom of press, independence of judiciary, respect for human rights, right? And India and EU has actually established relationship in 1992 after the post-Cold War, right? And both have signed a strategic partnership. India and EU have signed a strategic partnership. Now, if you look at India and EU trade, right? India and EU trade that has increased over the period of time, and India and EU trade is very much balanced, right? However, although India and EU have huge potential of trade, but there are several differences with EU, like property rights, like high tariff for India from Indian side, then right, uh, then other issues, right? Technology transfer. Now India and EU has come closer, right, because of the rise of raise of tariff that is used by America, right? America has put 10% tariff to EU. It has put 25% tariff, 27% tariff to China, and it has put 25%, 20 plus 25%, that is 50% tariff to India. So this tariff war has actually dismantled the world order, right? And this is why India and EU has come closer, and they are on the verge of signing free trade agreement, right? And this free trade agreement between India and EU will improve the trade between these two giant economy of the world, right? It will strengthen the trade, it will strengthen the technology transfer, intellectual property right issue, respect for human rights, and also, that the democracy, that we share the value between India, we share value, right? So that you can write. Now let me move to the next. India continues to evoke time-tested policy of strategic autonomy. This is about the United States of America and Russia by rejecting US offer of mediation on Kashmir issued, and by refusing to criticize Russia in ongoing war against Ukraine. Now, when you can talk about the foreign policy, right? Simple definition of foreign policy, which serves, which purpose is to serve national interest, and India's national interest has been the strategic autonomy. India maintained a strategic autonomy during the Cold War. It did not take support of US, or it supported USSR or US during the Nehruvian era, and it tried to maintain balanced relationship between US and USSR. In the wake of Russia-Ukraine war, US has put pressure on India, right, to criticize Russia and also not to buy Russian oil, right, and supports Ukraine, right. Now, India and Russia relationship has been historical. India and Russia is a time-tested friend. Russia has supported India on many occasions. India receives 60% of the defense equipment and defense requirement from the Russia, right? On the other hand, India and US relations has become stronger and healthier in the 21st century. Now 2+2 dialogue has been established between India and US. India and US signed on several security agreements like LEMOA, like the CATSA, the COMCASA, then BECA, right, right, to share the security concerns due to the rise of China, right. Now, with this context, now you can give the rise of the, due to the Trump tariff war, right, America is putting pressure on India to take the side of America, to stop the oil buying from Russia, to not opt, the rupee ruble trade with Russia, and also de-dollarization. Now, India wants to maintain a strategic autonomy. India wants to maintain good relations with Russia, as well as good relations with US. India wants to also maintain good relations with other part of the world, right? And India's national interest uh, cannot be compromised, right? The world should not understand their problem as a world problem, as Jaishankar has stated, right? And therefore India maintained a strategic autonomy, right? It has maintained good relations with US, and at the same time it maintained good relations with time and tested partner like Russia. Now look at Trump. All are actually, the current Trump's unilateral imposition of reciprocal tariff on scores of countries poses impending threat to the future of the rule-based in multilateral global trading system under the WTO. What options do the WTO members have to, salvage the organizations? So one can write about WTO, right? World Trade Organization supports rule-based multilateral trade, right? Based on principle of non-discrimination, principle of most favored nation, principles of differentiated and shared partnership, right? Now, with this introduction, one can write about the Trump, bypassing the WTO trade negotiations. Trump, the comeback of Trump or Trump 2.0, has disrupted the rule-based international economic order. It has posed tariff to India, to China, to EU differently, and it talks about imposition of reciprocal trade or bilateral trade, right? And sideline the global institutions like WTO. It has posed trade on tariff on Canada. So Trump tariff war has disrupted the world WTO rule-based world trade system, right? So what options WTO members have salvaged the organization? Now the WTO members should come together in order to protect WTO. India has very interest in WTO because India has no free trade agreement with many countries. We have limited free trade agreement, right, with the countries of the world. Approximately 18 countries have signed free trade agreement with India. Secondly, now look at WTO is an institution which resolve the trade disputes, right? And not only India but the global south, the countries of the global south have interest in WTO, and therefore the countries of the global south come together in order to protect WTO. However, if you look at China's behavior towards WTO is very much discomfortable or basically disappointed. And if you look at US behavior towards WTO is also disappointed, right? However, the countries of the global south should come and take the position to make it strong. At the same time, it makes appeal to the world, like world power of the world, like China, Russia, right, and US, right? But it will take time, of course. It will take time, right? So this is a one. Now let me move. Non-alignment 2.0. 2.0 underscores India's unique aspirations to emerge as a site of alternate universality. So one can write about non-alignment 2.0. Right, is India's vision and a strategic policy in the changing global world. This document was issued by India in 2009, right, to change India's strategic policy in the 21st century. It it directs India for India's foreign policy towards the greater power like US, Russia, China, and also it directs India towards India's policy towards the West Asia, then Southeast Asia, and so on, right? So after that, one can talk about, yeah, the major points of the non-alignment NAM 2.0, right? And it talks about India's security, India's energy security, as well as India's, the strategic security, that is, India is getting threat from the neighboring country, especially China, right? And it talks about, that relevance of NAM, right? Now look at the India's reluctance to pursue any existential threat inevitably made the multilateral path to nuclear security a default options until it decided to cross the nuclear Rubicon in 1998. Identify and analyze some of the major reasons behind this shift in India's position on nuclear questions. Now look at, India's reluctance to the perceive any existential threat inevitably made. Now look at Nehruvian foreign policy. So start with Nehruvian foreign policy and Nehru's position on India's uh, nuclear questions. Nehru was not willing to, develop nuclear weapon initially, and India's investment on defense was also less, right, as compared to the other, Asian neighbors, including China, right? After 9 India-China war, after India-China war, Indian strategic community has decided to develop India's nuclear weapon, and it was 1974 when Pokhran 1 Operation Shakti, when India tested nuclear weapon, right? India got some lots of pressure from the world community, right? Like NPT and CTBT. India did not sign on NPT, and India also did not sign on CTBT, right? And India tested nuclear weapon in 1998. That is called Operation uh, Shakti, right? So Pokhran one was Operation Smiling Buddha. Then second one was Operation Shakti, right? And then India formulated its nuclear doctrine, like for example, no first use policy, credible minimum deterrence. India shall not attack any non-nuclear state until India is attacked by nuclear weapon or chemical weapon and biological weapon. Right. So India framed nuclear policy, right, and now identify and analyze some of the major reasons behind this shift in India's position in the nuclear question. Now, the major reason for shifting India's position on the nuclear question was, the greatest threat that was coming from China. Defense Minister, Defense Minister of India in 1998, uh, declared that in China is a major threat to India, which is a nuclear weapon country, right? Not Pakistan. And India needs a minimum credible deterrence against China, right? So this was the one. Then second, uh, you know, everyone knows that Pakistan is a enemy or enemy brother enemy to India, right? And it has developed nuclear weapon, right? Secretly, and technology transfer from China. So India, it was a reasonable, region to test the nuclear weapon, right? And India tested nuclear weapon. After that, India faced lots of criticism, and also sanctions from US, especially, right? But it was a very rational decision for India to go for the nuclear weapon, right? So here I had to stop and then see you.